Welcome to everyone. Welcome to all who have joined us this morning as we continue our Caribbean Environment Week Virtual Summit 2020. Bold steps towards a sustainable future. That's our theme that's we've been running with since Monday. We are streaming live from YouTube. My name is Anne-Marie Goldburn and I'm from Environmental Solutions Limited, and I will be your moderator for this session. Today, we focus on the topic, financing for a sustainable future, risks and opportunities. This session is brought to you by Scotiabank. We plan on having a very informative conversation today, very exciting session. Before we get into it though, I just sponsors Scotiabank, Coca-Cola, John Cayman and Cayman Business Solutions. We are excited and pleased to have with us three very exciting and interesting guests. We have Mr. David Noel, Senior Vice President and Head of the Caribbean Central and North, and President and CEO of Scotiabank Group Jamaica Limited. We also have with us Ambassador Alun Dombet Asamba, CEO of CO Modality. Mr. Christophe Jungfleisch, CEO and co-founder of Yapu Solutions. For a sustainable future, risks and opportunities. That's our topic today. We talk about the money. Since the start of the week, we have been speaking about our environment, its importance for conservation and for management. Yesterday, we delved into the issue of climate change and the importance of taking action at different levels. One of the issues raised yesterday was the need for financing various interventions, climate mitigation, adaptation activity, and all of these things. And so, hence, we want to delve more into financing today. But before we kick off with our panelists and with our lively discussion, we have a poll question that we would want our viewers to participate. This is an interactive session. And so, we are going to ask everybody who is on, all our audience or our viewers to participate. Do you know how finance relates to climate change? Yes, no, somewhat familiar. We just want to get a feel of, what person, what are their awareness levels like. So we're going to give it a few more seconds before we have the results. Okay, so some persons are somewhat familiar. So everybody is interested in sharing knowledge and having a very mission this morning. Climate change it's a threat multiplier with the potential to push millions into poverty and in coming years and undo hard-won development gains. The threat of climate change remains critical for countries, forcing people to evacuate homes, grapple with food insecurity, or the impacts of deforestation and biodiversity loss. Even as we also deal with health and economic impacts of COVID-19. The whole issue of climate change and the losses that different countries experience due to things that happen in terms of natural hazards, the way we build, what we have been doing, we can't continue to do the same things the same way. And so we are at a point now where we have the opportunity to make good investments, the right investments that can unlock short-term gains, jobs, economic growth, and also deliver long-term benefits to people. So we are going to get into sustainable financing. I want to ask, first of all, each of our panelists or guests today, just to give a short introduction about, what you do, the role you play, before we, get into, what is sustainable financing and, the intricacies of all of those things. So we are going to start with David Noel. Could you go ahead and give me a short introduction, what you do and the role you play.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations to you and the organizers for putting together this event. I think it's very relevant, very necessary, and we're just happy that we're able to participate. So to your viewers online, I'm David Noel. I'm President and CEO of Scotiabank Jamaica, but I'm also responsible for the Northern and Central Caribbean. And I mean, at Scotiabank, sustainable financing is important to us. Being responsible members of our community, I mean, is critical to our long-term success. We've been in Jamaica for 130 years. So things such as climate change obviously is going to have an impact on our society, our economy, on our people. And so we have to make sure that if we want to be here for another 130 years and be successful, that we are playing our part to mitigate the impacts of climate change and being responsible as a financier and an investor. So looking forward to the discussion, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Alone, could you give us an introduction?
Good morning, everybody, and I'd like to thank you for inviting COK Sodality Credit Union to be a part of this discussion. I am currently the CEO of COK Sodality, and we do whatever our members need us to do for them. So one of the things we discovered about 2 years ago is that our members were complaining, particularly about the high cost of electricity. And if they were complaining 2 years ago, you can imagine what it is that they are doing now. And as a result of that, we searched around to see what we could do. And we ended up having a project with the IDB to see how we can help our members in sustainable activities, especially in their businesses. Now, as we had that discussion and as we did the research, we discovered that this was something that was not just only for our micro business members, but also for householders. And so we have gone into financing sustainable development, particularly in the area of alternative energy. And that is in relation to solar energy, but also in relation to the use of LPG for powering motor vehicles, especially taxi cabs and so on. So this is an area that we're into, and we have developed some loan products. But it took us a while because we've worked with the IDB towards really understanding what it is that our members need from us. It makes no sense for us to develop products that the members do not see a need for. So we're into that. And probably at this point, I should say that as we started doing this, we recognized that we ought to work on ourselves first. And so we decided that we were going to see how we could reduce our own carbon footprint. And we converted our head office into being completely solar. Can you imagine that? Now, I must admit that the outlay was
excellent.
But and I can talk about that a little bit more because we wanted to see what the experience would be for our members using our own experience here at our head office. So I can talk a little bit more about that if you want us to. I can talk about the savings. I can talk about the benefits we've got from it, which is good.
Okay. I want to just finish the introductions, and I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit more from now. And so just hold that, and we're going to get into it. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Christophe, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Yes. Hello, this is Christophe from Yapu Solutions. At Yapu Solutions, we focus on helping financial institutions, banks, cooperatives, but even NGOs and financial companies to introduce sustainable finance. We do this via the provision of software solutions, so that help to document better the environmental but also social impact of investments, to better measure climate risks, for example, ecosystem risks, but also providing consultancy in order to structure products and concrete solutions for clients, for members. We do this partially in partially via large programs. We are currently, for example, implementing with the UN Environment Program. We are implementing with the IDB, and we are implementing with large commercial banks such as BNP Paribas. So focusing mainly on how do we make it operational. As we will see during this discussion, it's not always so clear, and there are a lot of requirements. We need to prove different types of impacts, be it on the loan portfolio or on our customers, and we help to do this operational so that the commercial force in the field vis-a-vis the client has tools and solutions at hand to really make sustainable finance thrive.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Very interesting. We want to kick off our conversation with what is your understanding of sustainable finance and how it has evolved in recent times. Christoph, I'm going to have you go first. What is your understanding of sustainable financing, and how has it evolved in recent years?
Well, sustainable finance in general is everything like focusing more than just on economic and financial returns on investments, but also their financing. So I think there is the environmental aspect to it, and there's the social aspect to it, of course, always under strong governance setup. So this is to be integrated into the normal financial and economic analysis of projects and clients. What we see a lot in these last years, really, and even more in the last 12 months, is that we have a strong push for sustainable finance, and especially climate finance and ecosystem finance. And this is not only since the Paris Agreement was ratified in most of the countries in the recent years, but it's also that we see, of course, more media coverage. Yeah, so you see fires in Brazil, in Siberia, in California. Yeah, so it comes to the consciousness of the people that something needs to happen. And definitely the financial sector is the backbone of the real economy, provides the funds in order to also push for paradigm change. Yeah, so sustainable finance, I think, there are so far few international standards. Those are emerging. This is a moving target, so to say. But yeah, we are moving on that. We see much more clarity. We see also much more appetite from investors to invest in sustainable finance. And as the concepts evolve, I think we see also more push and concrete commitments there. So sustainable finance, ESG, evolvement is, that's the topic of the day. Honestly, we know also in face of COVID, we need to change the way how we do business, and the financial sector can act as agent of change there.
Okay, great. The financial sector can act as agents of change. So I'm going to go back to Ambassador Alom, and we'll now elaborate further now on sustainable financing in terms of how is this different now, regular finance, and maybe you could speak also to how this changes what your institution is doing while having sustainable financing on your agenda now. How does this change things in your operations and the decisions that you make?
Well, the first thing that I want to say is that whenever our members come to us to get a loan, as David would be able to confirm, is that we look at what their cost of operations are, and we find that our especially our microsector, they have high energy costs. And that is why we started looking to say, how could we help them? And in terms of their business being sustainable, we thought that this was one of the ways that we could get involved in it. And the truth is that it is a challenge for our microsector to ensure that they are able to keep their business operating because of reducing their energy consumption. And so it is because of that that we thought that this was an area that we wanted to go into. And we have explored it, we have done the research, we have discovered that if we were able to find a way to assist our members with just that, to reduce their energy consumption that they have to pay for every month, and we make sure that whatever it is that we lend them would reduce, would cause their monthly payment for their electricity bill to be less. In fact, we want to ensure that they're able to repay the loan because of not having to pay that electricity bill. And as I had said before, we tried to see how it would work by experimenting on our own situation. And what we did is that we realized that in the first 6 months of converting our head office and our main branch, we found that we were saving $1.6 million on our electricity bill. $1.6 million in 6 months.
Yeah.
And in fact, we were able to redeploy our excess electricity generated to the JPS and get a credit for that.
That is excellent. Wow, that is excellent.
So we tried it first and we see that it worked. And it has been working for the last 6 months. And, you know, Christophe could talk more about the whole idea of reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. For example, you know, we have a lot of taxi men all over Jamaica. And if we were able to get those taxi drivers to begin to use the LPG instead of the current gasoline that they're using, then it certainly would reduce the carbon footprint that we have in Jamaica. And this is something we want to see more filling stations to be able to roll this out more to the taxi drivers. So, you know, in Jamaica, where our primary source of energy is fossil fuels, we have to find a way of reducing our dependency on that. And that is the reason why we went into such a program.
That's a very good success story. I like that, Ambassador. Very good success story. I'm going to ask David for his take now on how sustainable financing and how that changes the way that Scotia, I mean, whatever is offered, not just in Jamaica, but within the Caribbean. How does that change your, you know, your decision making? How does sustainable finance fit within the institution?
Sure. So I think excellent question, and it's something that we all need to grapple with. The idea of traditional financing, which focuses primarily on an economic return over a period of time, versus sustainable financing, which I think it just takes a broader view of what you're financing and why you're financing things, and looking at the overall impact on what you do. And I think over time, you've seen convergence between traditional financing and sustainable financing. I think there's a realization now that if you're not financing projects in a sustainable way, or projects that are sustainable, if you have a long enough time horizon, you're going to see that the economic return is not going to be what you think it is. So if you think of supporting an industry like tourism in the Caribbean, if you're not financing tourism in a responsible way, you may get a return over the short term, but over the long term, if you destroy your environment, you destroy, you know, what's attracting visitors to the Caribbean, you are essentially damaging the asset, and your long-term economic return is not going to be what you want it to be. So I think if you have a long enough time horizon, you're going to realize that the only way to do financing moving forward is going to be in a sustainable way. Now, that's easier said than done, just because you need sort of a coalition of private sector, public sector, government to realize that climate change is an issue and to be mobilized around it. But I think as a financial institution, we have an obligation to be a part of that conversation. And so globally, we have what we call 5 climate commitments. And I'll just share them with you now. First of all, we want to have $100 billion Canadian by 2025 directed towards initiatives that are going to reduce the impacts of climate change. We also want to ensure that climate-related governance and transparency is there in all of our operations, whether in how we invest, how we lend, the green bonds that we issue, how we go about doing so. We want to ensure that there is transparency there. We want to ensure that we fully integrate climate risk assessments into all of our financing activities. So every loan officer in Jamaica now for corporate and commercial loans, the larger loans, has to go through a climate risk assessment form to examine a project, examine a business, examine an initiative to see whether or not it's sustainable. If it's not, even if the financial return may be there, this would not be a project that we would necessarily move forward with. We also want to look at decarbonizing our own operations. So what can we do as a large institution with many buildings around? How can we make our buildings, more, our operations generally more efficient and less reliant on carbon? We also finally we've established the Climate Change Center of Excellence. This is an area in which we want to ensure that we are engaged in dialogue with external stakeholders, the experts on the matter, the people who can help guide our decision making, because this is something that we want to transform our whole organization over time. So I don't think sustainable financing is going to happen overnight. In other words, I don't think you have all players ensuring that these things are done. But I think there's a general consensus globally that if we don't act collectively, we're going to destroy our environment. And that in itself is not sustainable, not for business and obviously not for communities.
Very good, David. I actually like those 5 points that you just highlighted. I think they are, it really brings a lot of clarity for those people who are not so, au fait with the topic and how sustainable financing is making a mark on and transitioning its way into the way we do business now. I like the incorporation of the private sector, the public sector, this type of joint approach where everybody has a stake in it and has a part to play. Let us look at maybe some of all right. Based on what you are aware of in the financial sector and the role that you all play, how far away would we say are institutions now financing? Institutions changing the way they finance. I know we said in our discussion that it's a transition. It's going to take some time. How far away are we from this offering of sustainable financing to our customers, to our investors, and maybe what are some of the issues or stumbling blocks that we face, in offering these things. I'm gonna start with Ambassador Alun for this one. Maybe she may have some experiences to share with us.
Let me tell you what the challenge is, first of all, is to educate the public in understanding that we have to do things in a different way. It's very easy to just go on with what you know. And the challenge with ensuring sustainable financing is that the upfront costs to, and I speak, on behalf of our members, the upfront costs seems daunting, but we have the challenge of explaining the reason why we need to move in this direction, which is if we continue doing business the way we do, and David, I'm glad you specifically spoke about the tourism sector, for example, because, I do have a little bit of history in that sector. And that is something that from as far back as 14 years ago, we had been trying as a matter of policy to get the tourism sector to understand that sustainable growth, sustainable development in the sector is what is going to be required if the sector is to grow and develop. Because people come to, and let me use Jamaica, for the sun, the sea, and the sand. That's what they always say. Mm-hmm. But there comes a point when there is degradation of the environment because of how we treat it. I mean, we've seen last night on TV, there was a program about God, what is wrong with me? About our mangroves and the fact that
yes,
our mangroves are dying, and the protection that gives our beaches is being put at risk. Now, part of sustainable development has to be focused on how we manage our waste, because we're not managing our waste properly. And that is why it ends up in the gullies and the streams and eventually in the sea and destroys the mangroves. So we're going to have to keep telling people and showing them what is the effect of not practicing a sustainable way of doing business. And it is something that is of interest to all of us. In my organization, we're starting with who we have. So it has taken us 2 years to get to the point where we are. And the reason for that is that we had to educate our members to say, this is where we're starting. We have to start somewhere. So let us start with how we manage what we have at home or in the business that we go to every day. It is going to require a lot of education. And this is something that we discovered in preparing ourselves for where we are now with the products that we have. That you start a conversation and you have to get the man on the street who has a cart, for example, to understand how what they do in their business affect the long-term sustainability of us as a country. And so that is what we've been trying to do over these last 2 years with the IDB and our partners through the IDB Include and IDB Labs. So the thing is that it's not going to happen overnight, as David said. It is going to require a lot of work to get persons to understand that what I do at home or what I do in my own business will have an impact on the sustainability of the country.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. And I liked how you brought up the tourism, the tourism, the sector and the interplay with the importance of sustainable financing and financing developments that are not just destroying and eradicating, assist us and help from these natural hazards and so forth. And so I'm going to pose the same question back to David to get an understanding in terms of his experience in his institution, with how they're financed, of the challenges, as they have this. David,
thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think Alun is absolutely correct that public education is key, and education of consumers, education of business people, and having sessions like this are so important to help drive sustainable financing, because we need to raise the awareness. It cannot only be the financial institutions, because obviously there's an ecosystem that you need to work well together if you're going to achieve the long-term results. So Scotiabank, for example, we had our initial ESG conference in Toronto last year, and ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And the aim is to ensure that as we do our day-to-day operations, we're not only practicing, operating in a way that's sustainable, but we're also helping to educate our customers. So we have an environmental checklist that all of our loan officers have at the corporate and commercial level. We have an environmental policy internally, and we're constantly looking at what we're doing, because the aim is to explain to customers that the reason why we have certain environmental requirements, or we want to know that they're aware of the impact that their business is having on the environment, is that we believe it's better for them over the long term, it's better for us over the long term if they have a sustainable business model. And there are two types of risks when it comes to sustainable financing. You know, physical risks. So if you go back to tourism, you're building a hotel, you are building it in a place that's, you know, not appropriately being designed or structured, and over time that physical asset is going to be destroyed because of the impacts of climate change, then that's a risk that they should be aware of, we should be aware of. And so we want to ensure that they are taking steps to adjust the way they operate or adjust the way they build to ensure that those physical risks don't materialize. And then there's this risk called transition risk, or the risk relating to the changes that are going to happen, whether in government regulations or consumer habits. If you're in a business that's not operating in a sustainable way, consumer habits may change and consumers may move away from your business. Government regulations may change or require you to operate differently. That poses a potential financial risk on your business. So we want our customers or business customers to see these requirements as not something else that Scotiabank is making it difficult for someone to borrow. It's something that's helping our customers to have a more sustainable business, given the changes that we expect to come and given the changes that are necessary to actually save our planet. So I think it's all about education and dialogue. Fully agree with Alun. And I think the more we can do that and the more we can engage is the more you'll have finance being done in a sustainable way. The truth is we need to move away from having sustainable finance versus regular finance to having all finance being done in a sustainable way, because it recognizes that we're all involved in an ecosystem that has to be preserved.
Thank you for that, David. All financing being sustainable. I think that point really took it home with what you said just now. I'm gonna ask Christophe to, tell us a little bit more about how can sustainable financing change behavior towards a more resilient, climate resilient investment and development. How can sustainable finance stimulate this changing behavior? And I'm going to point that question to Christophe.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will go along the way what David just said. And I think we see that we have with Alun and David, two representatives of pioneering institutions on this panel, which is very exciting. What I think is very important is, what do we know as of today? Yeah, so it's the first step is everybody needs to understand. So we can educate when we know what we talk about. Yeah, and even before educating or building capacities, honestly, I think comes awareness building. Yeah, and there's a fragile interrelationship between our climate and our ecosystem health. So deforestation leads to more greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. So it leads to more climate change. Yeah, accelerating climate change makes the survival of certain species impossible in certain regions. So there is a relationship, and I think what is important is that we, as humanity as a whole, as society of a country, and as different actors in the production, in the economic value chains, we have an impact over the ecosystem health, and we have an impact over climate and climate change, but we are also affected. So we receive certain ecosystem services from the ecosystem. So if health is degrading, we receive less services. You open the tap and you're at your home if you have this access, because many people do not. And the water that is coming there, it's not for free. It's a service, yeah, and it's a service which is being fed by ecosystems. And of course, especially when it goes to climate change, the impact is much less direct. So I think it's also a question that we need to see how we differentiate between different types of clients, different segments of clients, different projects. It's a difference if I'm financing and have a full environmental DD, a hotel or a big wind park, or if I'm financing a small holder farming, low cost drip irrigation system, which helps this smallholder farmer to adapt to climate change. So the first step is we need to build systems which enable us to learn, because everything around climate change and biodiversity degradation and ecosystem health degradation is about understanding what is happening and how does it affect us, so that we can build economic rationality around it. So usually what we see is institutions starting to integrate these questions into their processes and gathering more information and more data on what is actually happening. And we do this typically when we give out a loan, that we have a lending evaluation, we have a credit evaluation, and we need to consider other topics, climate risks, active climate risks, which really put in danger what our asset quality is, but also what is our footprint, carbon footprint, environmental footprint. And then we need to define answers to that. So if I know there is a specific risk, so how can I adapt? If I know that I have a certain environmental footprint, how can I mitigate that footprint? And we need economically viable solutions which we can provide to clients. So I think the start is that we raise awareness with staff of financial institutions, but also with the clients and members of financial institutions. We start to think about how can we create capacities, and then we have the right financial solutions at hand. So conditions and terms of loans adjusted to actual investment projects which are sustainable, but also the investment strategies for passive products where we can steer it into the right direction. Targeting sustainable finance should be the baseline. It should not be an addition or a competing concept to traditional finance.
Traditional financing. I like that, Christoph. Thank you very much. I just want to apologize for the technical issues that we're having. We're working on it. We hope that we'll have a smooth rest of session and no more glitches. I like what you said and the importance of raising awareness with the staff and the members of the financial institutions, even as we do with our lenders. You know, we expand it more into the different institutions. We have another poll question, which we're going to take that right now just to engage our audience. There are persons messaging us in the chat. We see them, and we're happy you're participating in our session. Are you aware of any sustainable financing products in the Caribbean? This is a question to our viewers, to our audience now. We want to see what the awareness level is like, because, you know, public awareness is one of the things that we're talking about. That's important. So we give it a few seconds, and there we go. The results. Most persons, 53%, said that they're not aware of any sustainable financing products in the Caribbean. Some people are somewhat aware, and there are some people that are aware. So not too surprising. It's a growing sustainable financing, fairly new in the Caribbean, globally, as well as it begins to pick up track, and as we begin to invest in climate mitigation and adaptation activities, as we begin to think about investing in developments that are sustainable and fostering those developments that are not detrimental to the environment. We want to move into know what are some of the products that may exist. And we're going to start with Ambassador Alum to see if there are any such type of thing, products that are available for investors, lenders, borrowers, I should say.
Borrowers. Well, we have something that we call our eco loans. And we will lend for projects that will take persons off the grid, for example. And we have up to $50 million that we lend under this portfolio. It's designed for our MSMEs and also for our householders, because we realize that if we're able to do that, then our dependence on fossil fuels will be reduced. We also have, as I had indicated before, the eco loan for our taxi drivers, taxi operators, or even if somebody wants to convert their own personal cars that they use for their personal business. We will lend up to $300,000 for that loan. And because we recognize that our taximen, they don't like the monthly payments. So we offer weekly payments for over 3 years. So you can convert your motor vehicle and you can pay $3,147 per week, because that is the schedule that most of our small business and micro entrepreneurs are used to. They like paying every week. And for the larger loans, we have, for example, a loan for $600,000, which would be to convert your home, for example, you know, in multiples of 600,000, and that is as low as $13,347 per month for 5 years. So basically what we're saying is, and I've actually worked it out for my own self, because, you know, my philosophy is, let me see how it worked for me first before I can sell it to others. And I'm currently in negotiations to convert my own home, and I will pay over 5 years, repay that loan at less per month than I am currently paying for my electricity bill. And it means that 5 years from now, I won't have to pay that. And the system will last for about 20 years. So it really works, it works. And the other thing that I want to say, and probably this is something that I will convince you, okay, to go into, or probably Scotia or David, you might want to do this. And again, it's out of my own experience, and it has to do with storage of water, harvesting water. Look at how much look at how much water is going to waste now because of all the rains that we're having. And it's not just in Jamaica, because I got a message from a friend of mine in Montserrat and they're having rain. I got a message from a friend of mine in Antigua and they're having rain. But earlier on in the summer, we had such a drought that for the first time in years, I had to pay to truck water to fill my tanks. Now, if we had more persons who were able to convert their roofs into catchment and to be able to build a tank and store water for a time such as we had earlier on in this year, can you imagine how that would work? I mean, as I was listening to Christophe and thinking of how else could we get involved in this, it is something, this whole thing about water and harvesting of water is something that I think we need to get into. David, I'm throwing it out to you also, because I had a gentleman come and look at my tanks and told me that if I know that the cost of repairing or replacing my tanks is more than the cost of replacing my house. But you know, the thing is that there are these opportunities that we need to explore, and we need to just get the education. I can't stop talking about the education, because I think that is where it is. How does my activities impact the sustainability of our country? Because how do I collect water? How do I get electricity? How do I dispose of my garbage? How is it that we can use the garbage in a way that will assist us in our sustainability? Because right now, I don't think that we have enough businesses who are involved in conversion of waste to energy.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ambassador. You made some very good points. I mean, you segued also into some planning and development issues with respect to water and those other things. And we do have a session tomorrow as well on urban planning and how some of these issues can be addressed as well. We're going to ask now David. So he now has the opportunity to tell us more about what things that Scotiabank may be offering to their borrowers.
So I think, thank you for that. And I fully agree with Alun that there are, a lot of opportunities to help individual customers, whether, retail customers or business customers, to be more efficient in how they use energy or how they use resources, to convert into more renewable sources of energy, to make their buildings more green, and there are a variety of ways in which you can do that. And as Alun said, if you look at the payback over time, once you do this conversion, even though the upfront cost may seem prohibitive, over time, you're actually going to be much better off. So that's one level of financing. And those loans are for individuals, whether for vehicles, for homes, for retrofitting buildings or businesses, just designing their buildings differently, going solar, going green. There are lots of different loans available there. But I think there's a second component, which is sort of the macro component or larger projects where the economic payback may not be as obvious. And so there's something called a green bond. And that's a green bond in which you raise funds from the public to make direct investments into initiatives that are really, about being sustainable, about having a sustainable environment. So it tends to be, around renewable energy, clean transportation, or green buildings. And Scotiabank raised $500 million recently for our first green bond. And those funds will then be invested into projects that are aligned with our green policy and aligned with sustainable development. And so I think you're going to see more and more of that happening as well. Investors being more conscious of the need to make these sorts of investors, and investors wanting to support sustainable initiatives and green initiatives rather than traditional investments only. And I think that's where you're going to see the real difference over time, when you have individuals making better decisions with the financing to support that, but also larger projects having the financing that takes into account a broader perspective of where we want to go and how we see our climate and or ecosystem, the biodiversity we want to have, how we see that happening. I want to go back to time horizons again. We've been here in Jamaica for 130 years. If we continue to operate as we are now, both locally and globally, we're not going to have the type of environment that we want to live in. So the time for change is now, but I think we have to do it in a way that's all-encompassing, that's broad, so that you're not just tackling individual needs, you're taking a macro perspective as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, David. All right, we're going to engage our audience a little bit more. There are some questions in the chat, and I'm gonna throw it out, and anyone that feels that they want to answer this one. Are there currently investments for newer, more novel, sustainable developments? That's from Joshua Anderson. Are there currently investments for newer, more novel, sustainable developments? Do we have any takers?
I suppose I can try and then.
Okay, great. We have 3 takers. David, you can go ahead, and then we have Christoph and Alun.
Right. So I think the important thing when you speak about novel or new innovative solutions, I think raising awareness through conferences such as this and others about what's out there and what's available is critical, so that financial institutions, lenders, investors can be aware of what that technology or innovations can do, so that we can then say, okay, this is something we want to support. So the green bond I mentioned before, it's a perfect sort of vehicle to provide investing for newer technologies that are going to help improve the overall environment. So I think a green bond is there. If it's new and perhaps not yet proven, the traditional loan may not be the appropriate vehicle, because you actually want to be able to start repaying your loan at a particular point in time. If it's something that's going to really add value, but is still relatively new, a green bond with an investment that can have a longer time horizon is probably the more appropriate vehicle.
Excellent, excellent. Christophe, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we also need to distinguish in sustainable finance different streams. So, for example, everything around renewable energies and everything around energy efficiency is quite developed. So you look around globally and you find tons of good reference examples which can help you to understand. On the other hand, you have the emerging part of biodiversity finance, of adaptation finance, which is a bit a different angle, which is like, how do I limit the risk over my concrete assets? So what do we, at least from my perspective, what I can see is climate bonds, green bonds. There's huge movements. You have the first bonds in the region, which really are on a very high level in terms of volume and also with very interesting conditions. And of course, what you need is the underlying investments. And there is maybe one part is I think what we see in the region, and when I'm talking about the region, accept my apologies, that's the Caribbean, but also Central America and South America. With similar climate patterns. What we see is there's a huge appetite from international donors, and you have emerging new business models. So just recently, the Global Commission on Adaptation had a round exactly on innovative financing models for nature-based solutions. And there were two representatives present, which showed business models, how to create a fund where cooperatives can invest in order to steer investment towards sustainable financing solutions, basically loans, which what we see in the region is a lot of institutions are already financing green investments, but they are not aware. Yeah, so they're not documenting it, they're not checking on it. And in most institutions, and we are working in the region with more than 20 institutions on these topics. And we see in the loan portfolios through an analysis, but also through interviews to field personnel and clients, that in many cases, drip irrigation systems, organic production systems, silvo pastoral systems. So there are a lot of systems and solutions which are already being financed, but we are not aware. So if you want to leverage finance, you need a clear story, and you need the ecosystem and the climate rationale. You need to prove it. And there are emerging financial mechanisms such as bonds coming. So I would agree totally with David.
Very good. Thank you so much, Christophe. I think you brought a lot of information there for us to chew on. Ambassador Loney, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Just a couple of things. And again, I'm going to go back to, and I thought that Christophe ended up speaking about drip irrigation, for example, the use of organic material in farming. And also, there was a time when houses were built with using the crosswinds to cool, and you didn't have to use as much air conditioning as we now have. So one of the things that I think we have to go back to looking at is how do we build our houses so that we take advantage of what it is that we have. We take advantage of the sun and we take advantage of the wind, and do not have to depend so much on fossil fuels to light and cool our houses. And this is an area that I think that we need to encourage. And as financial institutions who lend money for people who do these things, we have a responsibility to say to our farmers, look at how you are operating. To say to our architects and builders, look at how you are building houses, and let us now go back to I mean, this might sound trite, but the good old days of you know, when I think of my grandparents who used to farm and who used to water their gardens using a pan with holes at the end of it, and they were able to produce instead of, you know, dependent on overhead watering systems and so on. When I look at the old houses all over Jamaica that have verandas and windows all around, now you see windows as being some tiny things, and you are dying in those houses. So it is something that we can look at when our customers come to us and say, we want to borrow money, we're going to build a house, or we're going to do that. Let's look at it and encourage them to build in a way that will allow the sustainability in their living conditions.
Yes, and I like the point that you're alluding to, Ambassador, about influencing your investors and your borrowers to develop in a way that is green, is sustainable in using natural natural resources that we have to cut energy costs and all of those things. Very critical. We have another follow-up question. How do project leaders present potential developments in access to this green bond? I'm going to pose this question to David. How do project leaders present potential developments in access to this green bond?
Yeah. So I'll answer broadly.
To access this green bond.
Yeah, so the 500 million US bond was a sort of global bond by Scotia. So that's not a local Jamaica initiative. But generally speaking, when it comes to green bonds and green investing, there is a lot of information available online. Scotia has supported the principles behind the Paris Agreement. We have our environmental policy or green policy. All of that information is available. What I would say is any project leader should try and ensure that the project that they are doing aligns with those sorts of global standards and align with the policy. And they tend to be around renewable, things that are renewable, things that are sustainable, things that support, you know, mitigating or preventing climate change or slowing climate change. So if you have a project and you have an idea, there is a lot of information available out there. Try and ensure that that project is aligned with those principles. And then you can approach, obviously you can approach Scotiabank from an investment perspective, but you can, you know, approach anyone else who are doing these green bonds. And I think you're going to see more and more of these green bonds. And some will target different areas. Some will be around green buildings. Some may be totally around cleaner transportation. So you're going to have different, so you can pick your spot, pick your niche, and then explore the world available for the types of financing or funding that you may need. Multilateral agencies are also providing funding. So it's not just through financial institutions and investors. You also have multilateral agencies also providing funding for anything that's going to help you know, mitigate climate change and help with sustainability. I think the other key thing that I think people need to recognize, and we all need to recognize, is that the next generation coming up is far more sensitive and aware of climate issues, and they're far more curious about climate issues. So even if you're thinking of doing a project now, you need to think from, or my suggestion would be that we all need to think, let's do something that's going to be sustainable. Because if you start on a path that's not going to be sustainable, you may find that your customers of the future are not going to want to support that sort of business. So sure, do things now that are going to help reduce your energy costs and reduce your carbon footprint, because it's going to be to your economic benefit long term. But also think broader than that now, because customers that may be willing to patronize a business that's not sustainable now may not be willing to in the future. So if you have a long enough time horizon for your business, I think it's very important to become aware about climate change and about ways in which you can operate that are far more sustainable.
Very good. Thank you. I like that point that you made, David, and stimulating our investors to think about these things as they develop their businesses. We have a lot of going on in the chat. I'm just going to read a comment that we have here from the the Climate Change Division. The Climate Change Division has access to readiness resources from the Green Climate Fund to explore the feasibility of floating a green bond on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. The JSC is leading on the project, which is in the early stages of implementation. There was also a study in the Caribbean to explore the barrier to private sector engagement in climate action while increasing awareness of options available. And of course, there's more information on the Climate Change Division and from their website if persons wish to pursue. But just wanted to share that they, added to the fact that they have accessed funds and so forth. So that's excellent. So we're winding down, and go
I
ahead,
was just saying
Ambassador.
before you go, if you don't mind, because you refer to the Climate Change Division, I just want to say that we've been working with them. In fact, I have been to 2 conferences that they've had, one in Montego Bay and one recently in not recently, pre-COVID, in Kingston, where they're working with farmers. So the one in Montego Bay had a Caribbean flavor, and then the other one had to do with working with farmers to see how we can begin to get the farmers to understand the need for sustainability in what they do as farmers. So I really want to give some credit to the Climate Change Division of the ministry, because they're doing very good work. And just to kind of tell them, remember, we talked about the need for the public education, because without the public education, people won't know what you're doing and won't know how they can participate and how they can change their own way of doing things.
Excellent, excellent. I like how you just brought that back out to us, Ambassador. Okay, so I'm going to maybe put a little another little spin on things in our discussion. Are there any fears or concerns that if we don't shift towards sustainable financing, that the world is going to leave us behind? Are we going to be left out of trade agreements? Are there any fears that we may not be moving fast enough, or our developers are not fully sold on some of the sustainable interventions that they really should be considered, that they're ignoring in a lot of the developments? Mention issues with respect to not taking into consideration the wind direction and so forth. We're building houses, everybody has to be putting in AC, and all issues which also are influenced by the way we build, the way we do things. Any fears as we shift in this direction of sustainable financing that the world is going to leave us behind? David, I'm going to ask you to go take her first.
So
answer at it.
I'm optimistic. I think there is enough awareness in Jamaica, even though we still have much more work to do. But there's a lot of awareness in Jamaica, I think, at the political level, government level, multilateral support in Jamaica. And generally, I think there's an understanding that we are an open, vulnerable economy. Things such as climate change, global warming, rising sea levels will have a more devastating impact on countries in the Caribbean like ourselves than other parts of the world. And so it's in our own best interest, looking long term, to ensure that we are not left behind. So I think I'm optimistic that there's enough momentum, enough goodwill. Now, absolutely, we need to move faster, and we need to raise awareness, and we need to become more educated. And that's why congratulations to you again and the organizers for having this discussion. But what we need to do is have more of these sorts of discussions so that we can raise the level of awareness, so that we continue to have the political will and the drive by both public sector and private sector to act in a more responsible way. Again, it's not going to happen overnight. And you need to provide the incentives, you need to provide the information, you need to provide the awareness to people so they understand why this is better for their own good over the medium to long term. And I think once you raise that awareness, Jamaicans and people in the Caribbean will move forward and support. So not overly concerned. What I can say is that we can't afford to be left behind. The world is changing. We can't afford not to be moving and be a part of that change. when you look at the protocols from whether the Paris Agreement or otherwise, if we are offside, it may prevent us from accessing the support, the financing, and being just involved in a movement that will ultimately benefit us. So I think let's keep moving forward. Let's continue to raise awareness. And I think if we do that, Jamaicans will realize that this is in our own best interest and move in this direction.
Thank you. Thank you for that, David. Christoph, is there anything you wanted to add, any fears or concerns? I know you have a global perspective and not just a regional one that you would want to share with us.
Well, first, a personal perspective. I think fear would be the wrong reaction. Yeah, there are certain crises. We are going through the COVID and the climate crisis, the most prominent ones, and I think we have never lived in a better world to address these challenges than today. Yeah, so we have a better understanding than 10 or 20 years ago. We have more solutions at hand. We have much better networking capacities, so we can learn from each other's. It's not for nothing that one of the Sustainable Development Goals focuses explicitly, and I think David also mentioned it before, cooperation is the key. Yeah, we need to do it together. So be it a national society in Jamaica, be it on other countries in the Caribbean, be it on other countries worldwide. So as a national society, we need to work together. But of course, also as a global society, we need to work together. So I think fear is not necessary. We need to be open-minded. We need to rethink how we do business. And we can rethink how we do business. There are solutions, there are examples. We can copy and adjust them. Copying is nothing bad. If something works in a different setup, I can look at it, I can learn from it, and that's the key, I think, to everything. So, yeah, let's collaborate, let's find solutions, let's also look at what others are doing, because we can learn from that, and then let's see how does it fit to our local situation, be it in Jamaica, I'm German, be it in Germany, so we all have the same challenge.
Thank you for that, Christoph. Learn from each other, cooperation. Ambassador Alon, do you have anything to add to this with fears or concerns?
Well, not really, because I think it has been said. We have to make sure that we are moving in the same direction as the rest of the world. Everybody talk about climate change, but nobody seemed to make the connection between my own behavior and how it will affect climate change. And I think that is a challenge that we have here in Jamaica, to ensure that the public education is done. And I'm glad to see that the climate change division says that they will be doing more work in this area. We really need for persons. You know, when we were growing up, we were taught, don't throw your garbage through the window. And how does that affect us in the long run? We're seeing it now. So I think that is the same kind of approach we have to take. As Christoph says, not fear, but just an explanation as to where the world is going and how we need to go along to ensure that we are in step with what the rest of the world is doing. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look at the best practices anywhere in the world and begin to use them here.
Best practices. Thank you for that. I like this is going and the direction it's taking us. We have one final poll question as we go into our last section of today's program. Okay, do you know how and what your financial institution invests your money in? Yes, no, never thought about this. Do you know how and what your financial institution invests your money in? You know, we know institutions have, you know, different schemes, pension schemes, and all sorts of investment that they do when you put your money in them. Are we aware? We're going to give it a few more seconds before we see the poll results, which are here. And the great majority of people on a personal level, taking it now from businesses and developers, but on a personal level, we're not really sure what's happening with our monies in these institutions, and are the institutions taking a responsible approach in the way they do their investments. And we're gonna ask David to tackle that one for us first. What are some of the things or some of the responsible approaches or that is being done within your institution with respect to investing persons' money now, as we bring sustainable financing down to a personal level and so forth?
So I think that's an excellent question that you guys came up with, and I'm not surprised by the answer. The truth is, I think all organizations, all financial institutions, perhaps need to do a better job of disclosing what their views are on climate change, on sustainable financing. We have recently, we have the 5 climate commitments I mentioned. We do a report every year on progress we've made against those commitments. We do a report on our own progress in making sure that we are reducing our carbon footprint. For example, we made a commitment to reduce our carbon footprint by 25% by 2025, and we're on track to doing that. So I think with those disclosures, investors, shareholders, customers can be aware of where their funds are going or how their funds are being utilized by the financial institution to contribute to a more sustainable world. So with that transparency, with that disclosure, I think you empower people to make better decisions. And as I mentioned, the next generation coming up, people are far more aware. I think you are going to have more and more investors, consumers, clients looking to say they want to be aligned with our supporting organizations that are also doing things that they value, such as supporting the environment, reducing climate change. So my answer would be, yes, we need to do more. And I think disclosure in a way that our customers and stakeholders can understand is critical. And we've started as a global bank, and I think you're going to see more and more of that moving forward.
Thank you for that, David. Alone, any thoughts on that? How responsible monies are invested?
Well, let me tell you, we're a cooperative. We are owned totally by our members. We only do business with our members. And every year we have an annual general meeting, and our members come to that meeting. And now we've been able to even have more people come because of doing it online because of the COVID. And they see every dollar that we utilize, they know where it goes, because we break it down to say how much was lent for this, how much was lent for that. We only lend to our members. And when I spoke earlier on about getting into this business of our eco loans, it came out as a result of the needs of our members. So we listen to our members and we lend to them, because I think the question is really aimed at when you say, do you know what your financial institution does with your money? We lend all of the money that our members save with us back to the members. And they know what we do. And we try to ensure that we put products in place that they are interested in. And that's how it works in a cooperative.
Okay, thank you for that, Ambassador. All right, so we want to ask the next question. I'm going to pose a different question to Christophe. How does sustainable finance affect the loan seeker, small and large borrowers? How does sustainable financing affect seeker?
Good question, and not very easy to answer.
The person seeking the loan.
Yes. I think there are different levels to this now, and it clearly depends on what your house bank or house financial institution is doing, what the market is doing. Usually, What we see and what we also promote as Yapu is we are focusing towards a risk-adjusted pricing mechanism. So what we would expect is sustainable finance, active risk, passive risks, meaning risks directly on your assets. On the other hand, risks in terms of your environmental or carbon footprint, that we will move with more information and more requirement to really document what you're doing, be it to your members or to your current and future customers. You will get a better understanding what these risks are and how to price them. What we are expecting is that we are moving towards a risk-adjusted pricing, including these climate and environmental risks. And what you usually have in terms of mere operational expenses is that you need more documentation. So if you have large projects, they need to have an environmental due diligence. That can be a study from 10,000 to a couple of $100,000 for a given project, depending on size, of course. If you have very small customers, so Alun was speaking about the taxi drivers, or small farmers, or house owners for the rainwater catchment areas. Usually the financial institution is taking this over. So the due diligence can be done on a more simple level, and you can still document what you're doing. But the overall trend goes in the direction of risk-adjusted pricing, and you get, for lower risk levels, also including these, you get better prices basically for sustainable finance. But yeah, as was mentioned several times, it's still a way to go. We are not yet there.
Not yet there, but we're on our way. Are there any other thoughts on how does sustainable finance affect the loan seeker that Ambassador you may have, or David? Anything additional?
Let me show that to you, David.
Yeah, I think for
all right, David, go ahead.
So for larger borrowers, I think, and borrowers shouldn't treat it as a negative. But banks and other financial institutions are going to ask more and more information about what your environmental-related policies are. What are you doing to assess the risk? What are you doing to document that risk? And what are you doing to mitigate that risk? So if you're asked a question about the impact of your business on the climate and you don't have an answer, or the impact of your business on the environment, or have you done a study and you don't have an answer, it's going to make it much more difficult for you to qualify for that loan. And in fact, you may find yourself having to put things in place to demonstrate that you have a thought process around assessing the risk and also taking steps to mitigate that risk in a sustainable way. So borrowers shouldn't treat this as something that's a negative. It's actually a positive. It's going to help your business to be more sustainable moving forward and identify whether physical risk, transition risk, or other risks that you may face moving forward as a business, by considering all those factors up front. So I think more and more borrowers, large borrowers, are going to get that, are going to have those requirements before them. For individual borrowers, I think what we need to do as a financial institution is to help simplify the program. So there could be programs around solar, programs around water, programs around green buildings. It's just providing those packages and awareness so people can make those decisions. We're not going to have individual borrowers do an environmental impact assessment before they come in for a small loan. But more and more for larger businesses, that's going to become a standard part of the loan application process.
Thank you for that, David. And I like how you, sorry, I like how you alluded to the specificity, being specific to the type of borrower that you have in that scenario, individual versus a larger person versus a small, so that nobody is left out. Or because a lot of times people look at these things as negative, or you're stopping my investment, or you're stopping my progress, and you want to look at it as positive. This is gonna allow for your business to be in making money, making a profit for a longer term period, because you took these things into consideration. And I love that point that you've alluded to. And what it does, it says to me that you financial institutions are crucial agents of the change that we want to see, because you, through this process, stimulate investors to think about these things. And so when you have it in your program, it really does help. Ambassador Lum, you wanted to also add to that?
No, I just wanted to make the point that David ended with, which is that you have different approaches for larger institutions and what they're going to need to show than you have for smaller individual members like we have at COK here. There are different approaches, and we just need to just constantly get the information out there, let them know what products we have available, and let them know what the requirements that they will have to fulfill in order to be able to get the loans that they need for those products.
Okay, all right. We have had a very good discussion. I love the direction that it moved, and I know that it was very informative for a lot of our viewers. As we wrap up, I am going to ask everybody to think about, in a minute or less, what is it that we want to leave with our viewers today, whether they be investors or other financiers or just regular individuals. What are key takeaways that we want them to remember from this sustainable finance session that is practical? And I am going to start with Christophe.
Well, I think, and I'm just paraphrasing phrasing what my colleagues and fellow panelists also said. I think the first step is really we all need to get on the topic, and we need to increase our understanding. We need to understand relationships, and it is starting with everybody of us to have a look at it. And to start also shaping this future. I think it's on one hand on Jamaican environment, looking what can we do in our country, but it's also going further than that. And I think, yeah, the first step is start understanding what it means. There are online programs, start educating yourself. It always starts with us first. And then look at the institution and look at the business you're working in, and where can you build sustainability into your processes. It's never happening if we are not doing it. Yeah, so that starts from small initiatives, which we can then scale and which we can roll up further, which we can help to understand others, what is happening and how we can address climate change and ecosystem degradation. I think the most important thing is to get started, to increase understanding, and to learn while we are walking and while we are in the process. So this would be my two key messages.
Thank you so much, Christophe. And I think that was very excellent. Ambassador Alum, what do we want to leave with our viewers today?
I think what I would like to leave is in relation to our members and persons who approach financial institutions for loans to say, climate change sounds like it's a huge matter, but each one of us have to have a way that we respond as individuals to see how we can make a change in our own lives that will have an impact on what happens in this big sphere. So we at COK, we have started. We've started with the people who we work with, the small, the micro entrepreneurs, the taxi drivers, the homeowners, and that's where we start, because you have to start somewhere. Because if you just look at it as this huge problem, which bears no connection with me and how I live my life, we will get nowhere. And so this is what I hope that persons will take away from this discussion is it starts with us and how we do things, and then it will multiply. You know, I love to use this expression, the power of one. Think of what one person can do, and then what two can do, and three can do, and the effect that it has overall.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Ambassador. David, what are your last words to the viewers?
I think Alun and Christophe said it well. I mean, as individuals, educate ourselves. Make sure that we are aware fully of what climate change is, of the economic impact of decisions that we make, and start making different decisions in our personal lives to ensure that we are playing our part to reduce climate change. And then secondly, be advocates in our businesses, whether we work in business, government, private sector, public sector, wherever we are, be advocates for climate change and for raising awareness in whatever sphere we're operating in.
Thank you so much. And thank you all panelists and guests. It was a pleasure discussing with you. I think I love the direction that the conversation took us, and I love the points that were all raised. And thank you so much, persons who took the time to join us. I hope it was informative, and I hope you were able to take away a lot from this session. We continue with another session at 1 p.m. As we discuss then achieving economic growth and sustainable development. And then Thursday morning, tomorrow at 11 a.m., we go into discussing planning for an uncertain future. Please follow us on live Echo channel on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, as we continue with our very exciting Caribbean Environment Week. All the best to everyone.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. All the best. Bye,
everybody.
Download the new Scotia app with a faster low-time bank wherever, whenever. Be in control and transfer funds or pay bills quicker with just a few taps and a swipe. Plus, we're serious about security.
Okay, great.
Want real-time notifications for all your transactions? Check. Log in with fingerprint? Check. Turn your credit card on and off? Triple check. Protected. Your money is safe and secure. Bank wherever, whenever. You choose with the new Scotia app.